All right. Good morning, y'all. This is behavior scientist Tenola Oliver. Thank you for joining me today. I don't have any music on. Y'all know I like to listen to music. I didn't turn on any music today because, for some reason or another, um, well, because of copyrights, some of my videos, part of what I was talking about was voided out because of the music. So, when I find a way around that, we'll go back to listening to music as I introduce the various topics. So, we are starting a series. This is the social analytical perspective that I've been doing for a few years now, right? Um, I am introducing today the social analytical perspective between the power universe and the Raising Kanan universe. Here's two reasons why I'm doing it. One reason is because um, I think there were like a certain demographic of people that thought that my purpose in doing the social analytical perspective between power and friends was toxic. And it wasn't. I was just demonstrating like the differences in social constructs about how amongst certain demographics of people we're willing to ascribe a power dynamic and characteristic to certain personifications, while in other demographics the environment or the social dynamic may be void of diversity and and autonomy of characters, right? With a diversified background, right? That was my only purpose. I loved Friends, right? I watched Friends. The only way that I could have potentially even been able to unpack the social analytical perspective between the two is because I watched the show, right? Um, so today, as I began to, so I made a little makeshift studio this morning. I'm not in the space that I'm typically in. The reason why I'm not in that space today is because I have a lot going on in there, and I'm redesigning that particular space. So I apologize for having to look down constantly at my notes. But let's go ahead and get started. And let's talk about the comparison and the contrast of the dynamics, the intimate dynamics between the power universe and the Raising Kanan universe. Now, what is my purpose? As you know, that the foundation, we do a lot of economic development work, right? The purpose of talking and unpacking this particular dynamic, which is twofold. First is because I wanted people to understand that me doing the friend versus power universe had nothing to do with toxicity. It was about social constructs, right? And our social awareness as we're creating these personifications and narratives in the minds and the eyes of the public, right? And what it means to bring diversification to television, and how those power dynamics played out in real society, right? Entertainment does have a part in how people perceive things in society, whether it's truth or fiction, right? And that was my purpose. And so today, as we unpack the power versus the Raising Kanan universe, my purpose is to begin to or continue to do some repair upon inner city relationships, right? The power in economics is about relationships, the ability to build relationships. And in order to build those relationships to translate into economic sustainability, particularly for inner city demographics, we have to unpack and broach the topic of trust within the inner city and various components of relationships, which starts with the family unit and how those relationships pay out privately and publicly and how they have an effect in the marketplace, right? And how we have the ability to repair those relationships so that we can move forward and build sustainable societies and businesses. Okay. I gotta do a brain dump in this first session because I have a lot to unpack. Okay. And so this is a series, and based upon this series, this is really just the unpacking of the information, right? And then we'll be able to go back and revisit the various relationships and the components of those relationships and what they look like in the dynamic of reality and real society. Okay, I decided to start with the topic of raising Kanan. Why did I decide to start with Raising Kanan? Because that show just went off, right? So it's still fresh in our minds and in our memories about the dynamics of the various relationships. Okay, so we're going to talk briefly about those relationships, and then I'm going to stop it, and I'll be back next week. Okay, so. I think it's important for us to establish that Rack is obviously the matriarch of the family, right? For her to be the matriarch, that means that there was some, we don't hear a lot about it, but there is some dynamic of the children, right? Lou, Marvin, and Rack with their mother, right? The mother is not the matriarch, but Rack is the matriarch of her brothers, right? Um, and so we need to know that that is established right away in the storyline. We don't even see the mom until later on, and that's when we notice some of the weaknesses of the mother's personality and personality traits, right? Um, and although I started with the relationship between Rack and her son, I think that is probably the most important relationship that we see unplay publicly. And I think it is important to understand and to see and to perceive that though Rack is the power dynamic in the family, that she is the matriarch of the family, we see her as her son begins to mature and take on his manhood. We see her concede to her son's masculinity, and we see her concede to her son's autonomy and his ability to make his own decisions. And instead of her being confrontational with him publicly, she concedes to his masculinity and his power role in the family dynamic. I think that was very strategic of the writers to take that posture, right? And the things that she does are more behind the scenes than they are publicly, to help him manage his path throughout life, whether we agree with the things that she did or not. Like I'm just unpacking the dynamic of the relationships, right? We have Marvin, which is one of her brothers. We see the relationship with him and his daughter, which is, from what we can see on the surface, is somewhat void of instruction and direction, right? We also see the lack of involvement that he has in Kanan's life, right? As an uncle, and uh, as a leader in the family, and And when I say lack of involvement, we don't see him do a lot of public steering, right, in this particular series. He definitely spends a lot of time with Kanan. As we look back at previous episodes, we don't necessarily see the um, the upbringing, the coaching, the mentoring, so to speak. We don't necessarily see that in the first in the episodes of Raising Kanan, but we know he has some influence on um, Kanan because he's with him more than he's actually with Lou, right? All right, and so the lack of involvement that Marvin has as the male leader in the family, because he's the stronger of the two, we could say, between him and Lou. The lack of his involvement with his nephew and with his daughter, we can say, is directly tied to um because he spends a lot of time holding his sister's arms up, right? He is Rack's right hand, right? And he spends a lot of time supporting her um, physically. He's a protector of her, as well as he spends a lot of time massaging her emotions as well. We've seen that in some episodes. And so the amount of time that he invests in her, we see the lack of time that he had to invest in building the next generation. Not because he was not physically there, he was absolutely physically there. So we're not going to absolve him of all personification or characterization of being a leader within a male leader within the family. He is absolutely that. We just don't see as much coaching and molding as we do see from Rack, right? Um, Next, what is the dynamic? I didn't have time to broach Lou just yet. Um, Not in this particular episode. Um, I think the characterization and personification of Lou and his dynamic with his family is very delicate for a lot of inner city families, and I don't have the intellectual thought process around how I want to broach that just yet, right? Because then we had to talk about substance abuse, we had to talk about addiction, we have to talk about a lot of things that I'm not prepared to have the conversation with yet, and I need to go back and revisit some of those episodes. Okay, we see that Lou does carry the responsibility of the family in a different way than the other two do. And there's a way that I feel like I need to visit that topic in an intimate way, and I haven't. I'm not ready to do that yet. Okay. So we see the influence of Ronnie, right? So the influence of Ronnie on Kanan take place specifically when there is some vulnerability that shows up between his relationship with his mother. And I think it wasn't a social analytical perspective, but I did do an audio lecture on paying attention to the individuals that show up in your life when you're raising your children. I think Ronnie is a perfect example of that, right? It is not by coincidence, excuse me, when certain individuals have this attraction to you, to your family, particularly during the time that you're rearing your children. That is never by happenstance, right? And that's why we have to be so intentional and cognizant of who wants to enter into our spaces, who wants to enter into our lives, particularly when we're raising children. Okay. Later, we see Rat try to reconcile and make amends for her dismissal of Juke's lack of ability to have a maternal figure in her life, right? But at the time that Rat tries to make recompense for that, we see from Juke's perspective, right? The lens and the perspective that the author is telling the story from through the eyes of of Juke's experience, is that by the time that Rack tries to reconcile her relationship with Juke, it's too late. Here is how we know that it's too late. Because by that time, Juke is already expressing to one of her friends, I think it was the young lady that is in the dance group with her, that she sees the dynamic between her and her family. She sees her family as a weakness in her ability to be able to build a sustainable and a healthy life for herself. So at that point, as a behavior scientist, what does that look like? What does that feel like? From a humanistic perspective, is that Juke now is at a point in her life that she sees family as a weakness, and that it has destroyed her trust in people and building relationships, building intimate relationships. So when Juke shows up in the power universe, right? Is it the power universe? Yes. When Juke shows up in the power universe, she sees everyone as an opportunity, including Kanan, which is her first cousin. They have a really close relationship, but because of some things that Kanan has done to her, in not understanding the line of demarcation, where he should have been protective of her feelings with different individuals in her life. He ignored those lines of demarcations and pursued and met his need for intimacy, overlooking the ability of her needing to trust him in different situations, right? That she sees everybody as an opportunity. In fact, I think that there is some resentment between her and Kanan, that Kanan doesn't realize, or maybe he does realize, right? Because he does end up killing her, right? But it is from the decay of their relationship throughout the years, because no one has ever vested the time and the energy in teaching Juke how to cultivate trustworthy relationships, right? And in order to have intimacy, you have to have trust. And I'm talking about intimacy between a mother and a daughter, a father and a daughter, a cousin, a close family member. And so, up until all of what we've seen of raising Kanan, she has not really been able to develop that within her family. So family to her is a weakness, right? And at that point, everyone be, everyone becomes an opportunity to her, right? She doesn't see people as as people that she could potentially build trustworthy relationships. She becomes very cold and callous, and hard. And I'm going to stop there. And we're going to come back and we're going to broach the topic again. And we're going to see those same power dynamics in relationships and intimate relationships on the flip side, which is the power universe. And then we're going to be able to have a conversation on how those very tangible relationships begin to unpack in reality, right? And why there is some distrust of us in being able to do business with each other in marketplaces, right? And the ability to be able to build sustainable relationships. It is very essential and important for building economic strong fortitude within inner cities, is the ability to develop those relationships, allowing people to have autonomy, not trying to suppress people's talents or suppress people's gifts, allowing people the space and the time to develop healthy relationships with people in the community without manipulation, right? Those are the important conversations that we need to have. That is the difference between the Black community and the Jewish community. By the third episode, we're going to have those very critical and difficult conversations for the differences and how we rear children within the intercity, and how we develop those strategic relationships, and in comparison to how we see the economic fortitude of Jewish families, and how they rear their children, and how they don't leave any of their children behind, and how it's important to develop each child's gifts and talents individually. And they do that through their faith. Their faith is very much a strong proponent for how they teach their young adults to sustain their lives, so that they can be economically stable. Do we have the ability to do it without that village mentality? We do have the ability to do it without the village mentality. But how much stronger would we be if we really understood and tapped into it in a way that it allows each individual to be able to contribute in a healthy and a positive way, as we build economic fortitude in the Black community? And that's important. Is it void of other ethnicities and cultures? Absolutely not, right? But where we miss it is that we have seriously damaged the trust within the Black community. One, and we'll talk about this by the third episode, is that because a lot of us have had, just like Juke, right? She's the prototype for what happens when people don't have the ability to trust within their families. And that, in her inability to be able to build relationships and become, because what she is an opportunist. That doesn't happen incidentally or by happenstance, right? She was raised by an opportunist, right? We can see Rack as an opportunist, but she does have some boundaries for which relationships she's willing to protect. She has some loyalty to her family, but at the end of the day, she is still very much an opportunist. We see that, and based on what we know about her childhood, right, and her becoming pregnant by a police officer, we understand why she's an opportunist. And that's not the focus of the conversation. The conversation begins at how do we heal the Jukes and the Racks so that we can stop raising sons who don't see their peers, don't see themselves as their brother's keeper to their peers. How do we heal the Jukes so that they're not willing to kill their own kin, right? Or to try and to manipulate the relationships of their family, so that they can somehow benefit from a relationship that they shouldn't even really have access to, right? Where are the lines of demarcation between privacy and someone being able to develop an intimate relationship with someone without people thinking publicly that they have a right to interject or have some part of that relationship because they're an opportunist, right? Or because of how they want to control the narrative in somebody else's life, right? And all of that plays a part in where the breakdown of the dynamic in social in economic development is for the inner city, particularly in communities where scarcity is a very much a problem, right? And where do we pull from the leadership to help rebuild, so that we're not suppressing talent or manipulating experiences. And so there is this cycle of scarcity or an exodus from various regions because people become tired and weary of seeing toxicity be recycled instead of us having the difficult conversations and beginning to heal relationships so that we can build um, economically stable and sustainable structures within communities. And we can't do that if we're all doing the same thing. We can't do that if we're all talking the same language. We don't have the ability to do that if we're all trying to um, be the next 50 Cent, right? We all can't be 50. 50 done already been 50, right? How do we forge a path with our real authentic experiences and build economic stability in the society, that we don't see people as opportunities, but we see people as relationships. And it is seeing people as relationships that allow us to build sustainable communities, and it prevents us from allowing outside forces to use us as opportunities to manipulate us against each other, right? So it's not void of other cultures or void of other people, um, but it makes us rethink how we see ourselves in relation to others and what responsibility we have to one another. And that's the conversation we're going to continue to have just by looking at the dynamics of these relationships and the power force and the raising Kanan dynamic. All right. This is behavioral scientist Tenola Oliver. I am the CEO of Elect Leadership Academy. We also own and operate Elect Leadership Christian University. We're an accredited university. We offer associate's degrees in entrepreneurship with various concentrations. And I'm excited about talking to you about that. I am also a professor at Wilberforce University. I teach an entrepreneurship class there. So if you want to be able to sit under my tutelage or listen to my lectures or be a part of my teaching, then you can, those are the two ways you can have access to me. Me teaching at Wilberforce University, as well as through Elect Leadership Christian Academy through our associate's degree programs, which has a bridge for you to be able to enroll and continue your educational journey to obtain your bachelor's degree. I'm excited about having these conversations, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Peace.